We have to do this better. There's no chance we'll catch up to the Democrats, at least come to parity with them, unless we start treating our donors better.
I'm Eric Wilson, managing partner of Startup Caucus, the home of campaign tech innovation on the right. Welcome to the Business of Politics show. On this podcast, you're joining in on a conversation with entrepreneurs, operatives, and experts who make professional politics happen. Our guest today is John Hall, partner at Apex Strategies, a new firm focused on building sustainable fundraising programs. Prior to starting his own firm, he was president of Targeted Victory, where he helped collect over 48 million individual contributions and raise more than $1.5 billion. In our conversation, you'll learn why it's so critical for Republicans to narrow the online fundraising gap, what's changed in the digital campaigning landscape, and some ideas for how to move forward. John, let's start by setting the table for our listeners of what the online fundraising gap is, numbers-wise, and practically speaking, why that matters for Republicans as a strategic imperative.
It really depends on who you talk to in terms of the gap. But if you just look at a recent Politico article that was written that did an analysis of WinRed last cycle versus ActBlue last cycle, Republicans had 2 million individual online donors and Democrats had 5 million. So that's a 2.5 times gap that is having real consequences for us. And the biggest consequence you can see is just the disparity that we have on the candidate fundraising side. Smart Media Group did an analysis of candidate spending in the 22 cycle. And on the Senate side, the Democrats accounted for 73% of total candidate spending versus Republicans having 27%. That's the top 6 Senate races. And then if you go over to the House race, we're having a similar problem where the top 15 House races, Democrats spent 77% of the candidate money that was spent in the election, whereas Republicans only spent 23%. So having this disparity online is certainly contributing to the fact that our candidates just don't have the same amount of resources that the Democrat candidates have. And then it turns out that in order to try to even reach parity, we have to spend a huge amount of super PAC dollars, which just aren't as efficient on things like television.
Yeah, listeners will remember from our episode on the explanation of hard dollars versus soft dollars, if you want to get a refresher on that. But it's telling that people don't understand the practicalities of what's going on, John, because we saw last cycle, said, Republicans, are narrowing the money gap. And so if you look kind of at the top line, you put in our super PACs, their candidates, our candidates, and dollar amounts, it's not as big a deficit. But if you dig into, to your point, those candidate ad rates on TV just kill Republicans who are relying on super PACs for help. So that's the clear consequence that we face.
Yeah, for sure. And our super PACs are doing a lot of really great things. They're raising a huge amount of money. They're outraising the Democrats. But to the point that you just made, when it comes to the individual television ads that are run, our candidates are being massively outspent. And it's because we can't, even though we're raising far more on the super PAC side, we're not able to make up for it because of that increase in television rates.
Yeah, it's sort of like if you're playing basketball and one team gets to make 3-point shots and the other can only do free throws, right? Like that's sort of the deficit that we're up against. So you wrote a really good essay that people can read from the show notes here. You point out that raising money and building relationships with supporters are two different things. It doesn't necessarily mean if you're raising money, you're building relationships. How do they conflict? Is it even possible for these objectives to align?
Yeah, I think it is. I think that when you think about online fundraising, when you think about all fundraising, really, the first step is identifying people that could become donors and then converting them over to donors. And on the digital side, the way that we do that typically, or most broadly, is with renting email lists, renting text message lists, and with online ads. And in the rental market, whether it's rental email or rental peer-to-peer, a lot of the focus over the last couple of years has become getting as much revenue in as possible, kind of regardless of the tactics that are used. So you've seen, I'm sure you saw last week the article that Politico wrote that had the Trump campaign asking agencies not to use his name unless there was an agreement on it. If you go back over the last 8 years, so much fundraising has been done off of President Trump's name. And if you're doing fundraising off of his name or off of someone else's name that's not your candidate's name, you're going to get those people onto your list. You're going to get these people making an initial donation. You're not really building that relationship between your candidate and the donor itself. These folks may think in some cases that they're actually donating to President Trump's election. And when you then follow up with a ask for money, it just isn't going to resonate as much. And then you go even kind of further down the kind of like what is a slippery slope of how you're going to get money in on prospecting. You tend to embrace more aggressive tactics, whether it's matching, which is extremely like over the top, like 76 times matching type language, or actually asking people or calling people traitors if they don't chip in. And those types of things may convince supporters to give, but they're probably not going to give a ton of times to you if you continue with that kind of behavior. It also kind of weakens the ability to call for an emergency donation because everything becomes an emergency. So I think that like the first thing we do have to look at is how are we getting donors into these campaigns files? And we need to do that in a way that really does introduce the campaign to the donor. And then you can start following up with your house email, your house text program with content that really does kind of build that relationship. I don't think that it has to be two separate things. I think that you can build a relationship while you are soliciting money. But in order to do that, it has to be a more of a mutual thing. You have to give something of value while they're giving you money. It can't just always be it's an emergency, it's a deadline. We have 56 times matched today. You need to chip in to support President Trump, even if it's not going to his campaign. And if we actually start building kind of those relationships, giving updates, inviting people to join town halls, inviting them to in-person events, writing them thank you cards, sending them gifts from time to time. If you do those things, I do believe you start building that relationship that is more it's just stronger, and it's going to have less impact by external forces. Because like today, we're all in WinRed. We all use WinRed as the main payment platform. And if there's one person that does something that's over the top that makes donors angry, it can have a negative effect on everybody. But a lot of that is because there are not a lot of direct relationships between the donor and the campaign. And if you build your own relationship, when somebody does something stupid, it should have less of an impact on you and your program.
Well, I think back to kind of the challenge of social media. So when I'm working with candidates or leading trainings, I always talk about how social media is shared media. Just because people are following you on that platform doesn't mean you have a relationship with them, right?
For sure.
And it's the same has held true for online fundraising, right? Just because you get someone in the door and make a donation doesn't mean that there's any loyalty. There's no brand recognition with you. And so I think you're exactly right, where it's, yeah, you got them in the door on something related to Trump, but they're not going to give another time when they realize that you're asking for help for your race or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it really, I mean, this should be no different than any other relationship that you have. And if you're in a relationship that the other side is always asking you for something and never gives you anything back, it's not going to last very long. It's not going to work out for you very well. There has to be some kind of, you have to give something back. And it can be, I mean, I think a lot of folks would say, well, the thing you're giving back is you're going and running in this race, or you're winning elections. But I mean, in a lot of cases, like the campaigns aren't always successful. I mean, we don't have the ability to say that we're always going to win. And there just has to be more of that connection, I believe, between the donor and the people that they're donating to. And you can give things back. Most of these folks really do want insights into the campaign. The reason they're donating is because, yes, they care about the campaign, they care about the candidate, they care about changing things in America or protecting things, depending on, I guess, the candidate. But they really do want insights into what's happening on the campaign. They want to feel like they're part of the team. And so doing some small things can help build that kind of more of a two-way relationship where you're not just only asking for money. You're asking for money, but you're also giving them an update from the campaign. You're providing them pictures. I mean, it can be very small things that I think will really help in building that relationship.
Yeah, my advice to candidates has always been the bigger your list, the more money you'll raise. That's I sort of joke that is the only secret there is to online fundraising. I think that message has been heard in some quarters and probably overcorrected. I still think a lot of smaller down ballot campaigns aren't doing enough list building, but you're offering a different perspective on that strategy of chasing leads versus donors. Can you elaborate on that a little bit, and where do we need to update our mental models?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right to the extent if you have one email address versus a million email addresses, you most certainly will raise more with a million than you will one. I think that where I like caution people and why I kind of view just blind lead generation as a negative thing is this is hopefully this isn't overly complicated, but like when most organizations are determining what is the ROAS or the ROI on the efforts that they're
Return on ad spend.
Yes,
Right.
yes,
ROAS. We call it ROAS.
yes. They look at how much did you spend versus how much did you raise immediately or over time. What happens in a lot of cases is folks don't then take into account how many email addresses or how many emails did you send to that email address, how many text messages did you send to that phone number in order to get the donations in. So there's a whole nother host of costs that aren't just I spent $1,000 on Facebook ads to get 1,000 email addresses. It's I spent $1,000 on Facebook ads, I got the 1,000 email addresses, then I spent another $300 sending those people emails and text messages and whatever other things I did in order to get the donation in. So I think my first kind of view on this is I think one we've miscalculated the value of a lot of these efforts because we haven't taken a holistic view of this is how much we spent to raise from these leads. It is always just this is how much I spent on the ads, this is how much I spent on rentals, this is how much I spent on peer-to-peer. And then all that money that gets raised off the house file, there's a whole nother line of the budget that is this is how much I spent on emails and text messages, which should be counted against the return of of the amount you're spending to add those people, but it just never is. The second part of it is if you're a small campaign, if you're running for Congress, if you're running for Senate, and don't have a huge list already, there are probably greater places to go or better places to go in order to get leads on your list first. Like instead of running a petition on Obamacare or on the border or on something like that, you probably could come up with an email or a text message asking people to chip into something around those topics, and send a rental email or send a peer-to-peer text message. You're going to be adding a donor to your file immediately. It's always been kind of silly in my mind, the way that we have thought about fundraising versus lead generation for years. Like you'll go to campaigns and organizations and you'll say to them, I want to collect email addresses, I want to collect phone numbers, I want to spend $2 a piece. And there's no expectation that there's going to be an immediate return. There's an expectation that eventually you'll get that $2 back, but it's not like immediate. When we go out and we do rental emails or you do peer-to-peer text, when you go and actually collect donations, when you get donors in the door, there's really an expectation that you're going to be probably netting money. You're going to get money over the top of whatever you spent immediately. And people haven't taken the view of how much is it costing me to acquire a donor? And if you were to go to someone and say, I want to spend $70 per donor, I mean, most folks would look at you crazy if you said, I'm going to spend $70 to get these donors in the door, but we're only going to average $25 average contribution. We're going to be getting 35% back, 40% back. Again, they look at you like you're crazy for wanting to spend all that money. But then if you look at the lifetime value of a donor, and it is generally $200 for an organization, you're getting a lot more value out of that. So I guess that was a long way of saying, like, I don't disagree that if you have a bigger list, if you have more email addresses, if you have more phone numbers, you are going to raise more money. I think that my caution is always, if instead of spending all this money in lead generation, we focused it on collecting new donors into the file, collecting it on fundraising type efforts, and just had a better view of, are these new donors that we're acquiring, how much are these donors giving us over time, that most campaigns would be in a better spot. Because like Eric, too, like you start getting into the hundreds of thousands of email addresses, we're going to have inboxing issues. Like you're going to have to like sort through all this data. And it's harder. Large pools of data are becoming harder to utilize, at least in the email space, because of all the rules around inboxing and how you have to integrate leads into your file. And if you ran a huge campaign and added 100,000 email addresses in a couple days, Like there's no chance you can just email those people immediately and expect that you're going to keep all your emails in inboxes. So that's kind of my last kind of view on this is focusing on donors. You're going to have far fewer problems when it comes to inboxing. And you're going to be able to utilize those people really quickly. And I think just over time, like everything I've ever seen, all my time at Targeted Victory, anytime we did an analysis, like lead generation, like by the end of a cycle, you should be able to at least break even. But if you focus on donors, like you can double and triple your money, assuming that you're paying attention to it and you're actually acquiring new donors.
Yeah. Well, I'll be the first to admit, John, that I have used tactics on programs that I've run that we now look on as sort of, hey, we probably shouldn't be doing that, right? It's dishonest. It's part of the churn and burn campaign. My response to that would be, yeah, things have changed. We've got to update our strategies. It's not like TV where the format has been perfected more or less. Now we're tinkering with how we buy it, right? It's always changing. So what has changed in the last couple of cycles that's caused us to reevaluate and reassess our tactics?
I think though that one, there's so many more people in the market. You go back 4 years ago, you go back 6 years ago. I mean, you could count probably in both hands and your toes the number of truly full time online fundraising programs ran. I mean, you had the committees, you had a handful of senators, you had a couple House members, mainly in leadership, that were running programs, and then like everybody else was just running some small email programs. I think that what has occurred is there are so many people that are fundraising now. I mean, it's hundreds of candidates on the House side. Like we've encouraged everybody to create an online fundraising program. And in doing so, what has also occurred as we've convinced all those people that they need to go out into the email rental market, they need to go into the advertising market, they need to go out and they need to add these people to their House files, and then they need to email those folks. The more people that I think do anything, the more likely you are to have folks just be more aggressive, because the results, like truly, if you were to send an email and just said, my deadline is today, will you chip in $5? Or say my deadline, the deadline is today, if you chip in $5, it'll be 76 times matched. The reason people do 76 times match is because it works. Like it is going to result in more money coming in for you immediately. But it goes to the kind of the point we said a couple minutes ago. Like it doesn't help build this relationship where you're going to get a second donation, a third donation for these people. You're just going to get the money in. But I think that having more people in the space, embracing more and more aggressive tactics in order to cut through that clutter, is what has kind of created this environment where it's just not sustainable. I mean, the fact that our candidates are raising less compared to the Democrats than they were 2 years ago or 4 years ago. A lot of that is because like our online fundraising programs just haven't grown. Last cycle, we also had some issues with the economy, and certainly folks suffered from what was happening with inflation and people not being able to give again or give as much. But when we would do surveys of donors, like we would do surveys of a couple thousand donors and get a couple thousand responses back. Almost always the thing that these people would tell us in the verbatims is that they were sick of being guilted. They were sick of being lied to. Like they couldn't keep giving all the time. Like these folks don't have unlimited bank accounts, so they can't give as much. And so I just think that like all of these factors kind of played into at least my evolution on this, where I've kind of come to believe like we have to do this better. There's no chance we'll catch up to the Democrats and at least come to parity with them unless we start treating our donors better. Because the other kind of challenge we have is we could continue with all these same tactics and then go out and we could have outside groups potentially help invest in finding a bunch of new donors. But if you get those donors into these files and we continue to call them traitors and we continue to lie to them over and over and over again, are they going to continue donating at a high rate? And the answer to that is I just don't think they will. And you can go back to the evidence of the fact that it just got more aggressive based on refunds. Like you go back a couple cycles ago, a campaign having a 1% refund rate was pretty high. I think I heard that people were having 6-8% refund rates last cycle. Like that's a very big increase. And the only thing inflation probably helped increase that. But I mean, it certainly also was that folks were feeling burnout and just not treated well.
Well, we have created a tragedy of the commons problem, right? We said, look, we've got this fundraising gap. Republicans are being outspent by Democrats because of their online fundraising. Everyone needs to do online fundraising. And the piece that didn't get communicated was it is your job as a candidate to bring new people into the fold, that's what we saw with the Democrats in 2020, where they had metrics that they had to hit to bring donors into the party, and they stuck around. And so you have Bernie Sanders donors, you have Kamala Harris donors, Elizabeth Warren donors, and Joe Biden donors. They are in the party now. They're in the ecosystem, and we miss that step, I think, in telling people, look, you've got to have an online fundraising program. And people ended up just going with the pool that we had. You're listening to the Business of Politics show. I'm speaking with John Hall about the world of online fundraising. John, one of the biggest challenges facing decision makers on campaigns is that the world of online fundraising is so complex, always changing. It is difficult to be an experienced expert on it. And of course, with digital campaigning, you can be overwhelmed with lots of metrics and may not know where to start, be afraid of asking questions. So what are some of the key questions or answers that campaigners need to be getting from their online fundraising firms?
Yeah, I think the first question really is how much does everything cost? I think having a clear understanding of what you're paying and is what you're paying market rate. I think that online fundraising is so complicated because unlike mail, there's not just one channel. I mean, there's like digital is many channels, and I believe that a lot of times campaigns go into this without an understanding of how much they're paying for emails and how much they're paying for text messages and how does the rental market work. I think there's some misconceptions sometimes about prospecting. What most people don't realize when you go rent an email list, there is no merge purge happening. It's not like direct mail. A good portion of the donors that you're getting, you may already have on your list, and so having an understanding of that and knowing what you pay for someone if they are already on your list and they make another donation. I think asking how is recurring handled? Like if somebody makes a donation off of a rev share email rental, are you continuing to pay for that on the subsequent recurring donations or the money pledge donations that come in? That would be the first thing that I would tell any campaign talking to anybody in the online fundraising space is get a very clear understanding of where all of the costs are and what you're paying for everything. And then once you kind of sort that out, I would ask for reports on what is it costing me to acquire a donor? What is the true return from those folks? And go a little bit away from it's costing me 37 cents to run a petition on Facebook kind of metrics that I think a lot of times are what are touted. Like I think you need to get to how much am I paying to acquire a donor, and then how often are those folks giving to me, and then then you just get into the reporting side.
Yeah, it's a real challenge because I think the thing that's missing is reports that go a layer deep beyond what the software spits out, right? So if you're just, hey, look, I'm pulling the Facebook report and it's 37 cents per lead. Okay, well, your job's not done. You've got more to do. You've got to, what is our cost to send? What is our, our monthly retainer, and really reflecting the true value of that. So for someone listening right now who might be concerned about the performance of their online fundraising program, or they're trying to figure out how they might have been able to do better last year, what's your advice on how to get that back on track?
Yeah, I think that the first thing is you have to take an inventory of what you have. There has to be like a clear understanding of I have this many email addresses, these people have opened an email in the last 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, like those kind of stats. This is how many online donors I have. This is how many phone numbers I have on my text file. To me, that's the first thing you do is you sit down, you figure out what is the true inventory of what I have. Then you have to figure out what is a realistic expectation of what you're going to get from these people. Like if you're a campaign and you have 1 million email addresses, but only 30,000 of those people have opened over the last 30 days, it tells a much different story than if you have 1 million email addresses and you have 800,000 that have opened in the last 30 days. And kind of the program you need to build is going to be based on that. Because if you truly have 1 million emails and only 30,000 have opened and you've been sending emails to these people, it means you don't really have very good leads. And so you probably are starting with 30,000 email addresses. And then it's about coming up with a realistic plan. I think that the other problem with last cycle that got everybody in trouble is everybody looked at 2020, which was a historically good year, and built projections that were just unrealistic. There was no chance we could get to it because there weren't enough donors in the space to support it. And so I think that, like, if I was putting a fundraising program or trying to get one back on track, I mean, I would have some very honest conversations with the principal and the people involved in the campaign about, this is actually what's realistic and this is what we can do. Because where we run into more problems is when you set a goal that is really unrealistic, and then you're doing everything you can, you try to force it through, and then you get all the bad kind of habits that we've talked about on this call occurring. So you set some realistic goals, and then, like, the way that I would do it is I would start actually talking to the supporters that I have and trying to build that relationship with them, like telling them what's happening on the campaign, why their money's important. I'd probably schedule some teletown halls and, like, invite those people to join, to listen to the candidates speak, and do those types of things to just make sure the people that I do have stay a part of the team and feel like a very, very strong part of the team. And then as we add people to it, as we run rental emails and peer-to-peer, we continue with that, so that everybody that we add becomes part of that team, part of my team that I can count on.
So more nurturing those leads and building those relationships, trying to salvage what you've already got. We're gearing up for 2024, John, and I know you're involved in one of those efforts. So can you tell us a trend that you expect to see over the coming cycles, or maybe not just the presidential level, but up and down the ballot, of what campaigns are going to be doing to recalibrate their online fundraising programs?
Well, I mean, my hope is that they do what we've been talking about, which is we treat donors better. We go out, we try to find new donors. I mean, that would be you asked me for, I guess, a trend, not my hope, but that is kind of my hope. And, like, we're trying to do that with the campaigns and organizations I work with. I mean, I think in talking to you, Eric, like these kind of conversations, I think, help that, because the more people that kind of recognize what is being done in the online fundraising space, the more that we can kind of pressure the tactics to be just better. So that's my hope. I think in terms of trend, I mean, I think that you're going to see people, I mean, this is going to be a popular answer, I guess, but I think you're going to see people start to embrace AI more. Shane Goldmacher of New York Times wrote an article yesterday where he talked about the Democrats, a lot of the things they're doing. I know Republicans are doing a lot of the similar things. I think that there is an ability to create very customized content using AI. I don't know that anybody is there yet, but I think with a presidential cycle coming up, I would imagine that there will be campaigns that will be looking into how to better utilize AI in order to create more custom marketing programs for people. Because it's, like, crazy that you could have, let's go back to the 1 million person list. You could have a 1 million person list, and the way that those 1 million people got onto the file is not one way. They probably got onto the file 200,000 different ways, and that they got onto the file and then they all acted different. Yet when we try to do marketing to a lot of these folks, we end up doing one email to as many of them as we can at a time. But the reason why it hasn't been as individualized as it should is because it takes a huge amount of effort. I mean, you couldn't create 200 different marketing funnels. Like, you couldn't do that. You couldn't have 200,000 journeys. Like, who's going to be able to create that? But I think that AI opens up the possibility to create more customized programs for each person on your list. And so I would expect that people will be talking about that more. Now, whether anybody comes up with, it's kind of like CRMs. You'd think that by now we'd have CRMs that are used in politics that actually work, but, like, we've been talking about it for a decade, and, like, the stuff that I see is pretty much the same things we were doing 10 years ago. So I don't know, I'm sure people will be talking about AI and how it's going to have these huge impacts. I don't know that it actually will, but I'm excited about it. I think that it has a ton of applicability to what we do.
Well, before we wrap up, John, if you could change one thing right now to improve the overall prospects of Republican online fundraising, what would it be?
I mean, based on my earlier answers, you'd think I'd go in a different direction, but, like, what I would say is that we need to change the incentive structure for how we pay for things in online fundraising. Like, that is the quickest way that we would change everything. Like, if I had one wish, it would be that everybody is paid on a net incentive, that everything is based on cost. Like, we are charging at like pretty reasonable markups on products, but that everybody makes their money based on netting money. And if we did that, you'd have far more efficient programs. You would have people ideally treating donors better, because it would be in their interest to get a second and a third donation from those people off a house file versus off of a rental list or a peer-to-peer list. So that would be if I had a magic wand and I had to change one thing, that would be the singular thing that I would change, which makes me probably an enemy to many people in our space.
Well, it certainly is one thing that we could change to get people focused on the results and the outcomes, right? Like that's what we want to do. I want to say thanks to John Hall for a great conversation. You can learn more about him at the link in our show notes. If this episode made you a little bit smarter or gave you something to think about, all that we ask is that you share it with a friend or colleague. You look smart in the process too. So it's a win-win for everybody. Remember to subscribe to the Business of Politics show wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss an episode. You can also get email updates at businessofpoliticspodcast.com. With that, I'll say thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.